The entity that called itself the Censorate did not perceive war as a matter of kinetics or violence. It perceived it as a matter of information. To the Censorate, a civilization was its network. The messy, biological components, the flesh, the blood, the chaotic individual minds were merely inefficient terminals, temporary hosts for the data. The true lifeblood was the data itself, the financial transactions, the communication streams, the tactical networks, the logistical databases. Their doctrine was simple, clean, and had never failed. Silence the network, and the civilization dies. It was not an act of malice. It was an act of archival, a process of bringing a noisy, chaotic, and inefficient system into a state of perfect, permanent, and silent stasis. Their weapon was the Logos virus. It was not a bomb, but a signal, propagated at faster than light speeds through the same subspace networks that species like humanity used for their interstellar communications. The Logos was a masterpiece of digital oblivion. It was a single, perfect line of code that, upon entering a microprocessor-based system, did not destroy it. It simply inserted a single recursive paradoxical command: stop. It did not wipe the data. It merely made the data inaccessible, locking every gate, shuttering every window, and throwing away the key, all in the space of a single silent picosecond. It was the digital equivalent of a perfect systemic stroke, inducing a permanent, locked-in state for an entire civilization. On the bridge of the human fleet's flagship, the INS Agamemnon, Admiral Koya was coordinating a fleet-wide sensor drill. He was a man who commanded a navy of unparalleled technological sophistication. His ships were smart, their systems integrated, their tactical responses calculated by brilliant sixth-generation AIs. His bridge was a silent, humming cathedral of holographic displays and touch-sensitive glass. When the Logos arrived, it did not even register as a threat. It was just a background neutrino flux anomaly from the FTL-COM array. Then in an instant, the music of the bridge stopped. The holographic displays did not shatter, they simply vanished. The humming of the reactor's control system did not wail an alarm. It simply ceased. The lights, the artificial gravity, the life support, every system managed by a central computer, which was every system, went dark and inert. The Agamemnon, a ship with the power to crack a continent, was now just a silent, 1.2-kilometer-long coffin, its crew of 8,000 souls, trapped inside, beginning the slow, terrifying process of suffocation across the entire Sol defense fleet, across all of human-colonized space. The same silent, perfect death occurred. The digital decapitation was total. Into this new, profound silence, the Censorate fleet arrived. Their ships, the Glossia, were vast, smooth, featureless ovoids of an impossible matte black. They looked like holes in space. They began their work. Ground troops, the agents, descended upon the colonies and on Earth itself. They were tall, chrome, featureless beings, moving with a fluid, networked grace. They did not carry weapons. They carried archival tools. They moved through the dark, chaotic cities where cars had stopped dead, where power grids had failed, and where the human population, cut off from their phones, their internet, their entire networked reality, had descended into a predictable, terrified, and disorganized mob. The agents ignored the riots. They ignored the panic. They moved to the great data centers, the libraries, the government buildings. They were not here to kill. They were here to catalog the final, silent remnants of a failed network. The war, according to their flawless, silent logic, was already over. Admiral Elias Thorne was, in the polite language of the modern Sol Defense Force, a relic. He was a man who believed that a ship's soul was in its reactor, not its code. He was a creature of grease, steam, and paper charts, and his command was a reflection of his philosophy. He was the keeper of the Boneyard, the mothball fleet orbiting Titan, a vast, silent graveyard of the Navy's old, decommissioned, and utterly obsolete ships. His flagship, the INS Argos, was a monster, an old-generation dreadnought from an era before network-centric warfare. She was an ugly, brutalist block of steel and composites, Her primary systems built around a massive, shielded, analog-controlled fusion reactor. Her guns were not smart missiles, they were colossal, chemically propelled dumbfire kinetic cannons. Her navigation was not quantum-locked to a GPS grid. It was based on a spinning gyroscope, a set of paper star charts, and a massive optical glass telescope dome. The Argos was an air-gapped, steampunk monstrosity, and Thorne loved her more than anything in the universe. He was in the astrogation dome, teaching a group of sullen, resentful cadets the dead art of celestial navigation when the Logos hit. "The stars are not just data points on a screen, Lieutenant," Thorne was saying, his eye pressed to the brass eyepiece of the sextant. "They are the map. They are the constant. A network can lie. The stars are truth." "But Admiral," one of the cadets, a bright young woman named Chen, said, holding up her dead data tablet, "my tactical display just died. So did the lights in the mess, and the primary comms array. The ship's modern digital upgrades, the concessions, to the new Navy that Thorne had been forced to accept, had all gone dark. The LED lights and the network tablets were dead, but the Argos itself was not. A low, powerful, non-digital hum still vibrated through the deck plates. The old, incandescent, hardwired emergency lights, powered directly from the analog reactor, flickered on, casting a warm yellow glow over the dome. The air recyclers, great, bellowing, mechanical lungs, never even stuttered. Thorne lowered the sextant, a strange, cold and terrible light dawning in his old eyes. He had spent his entire career planning for this, for the day the smart world failed. He had been mocked as a paranoid, an analog-obsessed fool. He had not been paranoid enough. "Cadet Chen," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Go to the engineering deck. Find Chief Hadek. Tell her to initiate a full, manual cold reactor restart. No computers. I want a hand on every lever, a pair of eyes on every physical gauge. We go to full combat-ready status. Understood?" "But sir," she stammered, "comms are down. The fleet. What are our orders?" "We are the only ship left in the sky that can take orders, Lieutenant," Thorne said, turning back to his star charts. "Our orders are to survive." He began to plot, a series of complex equations on a roll of paper. The Argos had an FTL drive, an old, clumsy slingshot model that required a manual calculation for its jump vector, a calculation so complex that no one had done it by hand in 50 years. No one but Thorne. He had been doing it for practice his entire career. He looked at the vast, silent black ships of the Censorate on his optical scope, now moving into low Earth orbit, ignoring the dead, mothballed fleet out by Titan. "Cadet," he said, his voice a low growl of pure, condensed fury. "Get to the engine room. Tell the chief we're making a burn. We're going to Earth, and we're going in loud." General Eva Rostova was in hell. Her hell was a concrete box 2 miles beneath the Cheyenne Mountains. The Aegis bunker, the brain of Earth's planetary defense, had been struck deaf, dumb, and blind. The Logos virus had done its job with terrifying precision. The massive holographic command and control globes were dark. The quantum-entangled FTL comms, which connected her to the fleet, were silent. The orbital defense grid, a network of sophisticated AI-driven railgun batteries, had simply stopped. All she had left was her own mind, a map on the wall, and the 30 souls trapped in the bunker with her. The Censorate agents, their sleek, chrome bodies moving with fluid, networked grace, were already on the surface. Her perimeter sensors, the analog ones, simple seismic geophone lines and infrared tripwires, were reporting a systematic, methodical advance on the bunker's hidden entrances. They were here to archive the planet's primary command node. "They're not trying to blow the doors," her security chief said, his face pale in the red emergency lighting, which was powered by a primitive air-gapped diesel generator. "They're scanning. They're trying to interface with the outer mainframe." "They're trying to hack us," Rostova whispered, a sudden, desperate, and cold spark of an idea igniting in her mind. "They think this is a digital fight. They think we're just another network to be silenced." She looked at her chief. How analog is this place really, Chief? General? The defenses, the old ones. The heritage systems they made us keep for the tourists. The Chief's eyes went wide. Ma'am, they're fully analog. They're not on any network. They're hardwired to manual, hydraulic, and electric controls. In this room. Then fire them, Rostova commanded. Fire all of them. The Censorate agents, their minds a local high-speed mesh network, were gathered around the massive 20-foot-thick blast doors of the Aegis. They were preparing to deploy a focused data disruption tool, a device to unlock the bunker's digital systems and archive the contents. They perceived no threat. Their local network was a calm, silent sea of analytical data. They had no protocol for what happened next. A series of heavy, grinding mechanical clangs echoed from the mountain. Above. The heritage systems, old-fashioned automated M2 Browning machine guns and 40mm grenade launchers, all controlled by simple, unhackable, analog electric relays tied to physical tripwires, came to life. They were not smart, they were dumb, loud, and brutally effective. A storm of hot, solid, chemically propelled metal slugs and high-explosive grenades ripped through the Censorate formation. The agents, whose bodies were designed to withstand energy and data assaults, had no defense against pure, kinetic shredding force. Their chrome bodies were torn apart, shattered and blown into pieces. Their perfect local network collapsed into a screaming chaos of dead nodes and corrupted data. They had, for the first time, encountered a weapon that had no interface, no network, and no off switch. It was a dumb, physical, and utterly furious machine. In her dark bunker, General Rostova heard the muffled, percussive thump of her own guns, a sound that had not been heard in those mountains for 70 years. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Chapter 4. Ben Carter was a man who loved things that clicked. In a world of silent, touch-sensitive glass and frictionless data, Ben was an anachronism. He was a senior technician for the regional power company, but his real passion, his obsession, was the old grid. He was one of a handful of hobbyists, linemen, who voluntarily maintained the vast, forgotten network of copper telephone wires that still crisscrossed the continent, a relic of the 20th century, left in the ground and forgotten, but never removed. He saw it as a historical duty, and as a hedge against a solar flare that might wipe out the digital world. His colleagues thought he was insane. When the Logos virus hit, Ben was in his truck, a 1973 Ford F-100 with a manual transmission, a carburetor, and no computer of any kind. The truck didn't even stutter. The radio just went to static. He drove through the dead, silent city, past the thousands of stalled, inert, electric, smart cars, and went to his private workshop. It was a brick warehouse that held his life's work, a fully restored, operational 1940s-era Strowger electro-mechanical telephone exchange. It was a machine the size of a room, a beautiful, terrifyingly complex sculpture of copper, brass, steel relays, and rotary switches. It had no microprocessor, it had no code. It ran on pure, simple, analog electricity. It was, by its very nature, immune to the Logos virus. He fired up his personal diesel generator, a massive, grumbling beast from an old hospital. The lights in his workshop flickered to life. He threw the main breaker on the Strowger switch. The machine, after a moment of silence, came to life with a sound that was a symphony to Ben's ears. A rising, rhythmic clack, 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 clack of 1,000 mechanical relays opening and closing. It was alive. He ran a hard line from the exchange to the telephone pole outside, his lineman's spike sinking into the old wood. He found the old copper trunk line 7, the one he knew led to the Cheyenne Mountain complex, and jacked his system directly into the continent's copper nervous system. He ran back inside, his heart hammering. He picked up an old heavy black bakelite rotary phone, put the receiver to his ear, and was met with the most beautiful sound in the world. A low, steady, mechanical dial tone. He knew the old analog numbers for the military's heritage lines. He put his finger in the 0 hole and pulled. Then again, and again. He was calling the one number in the world he knew had to be there. After 3 rings, a voice sharp and terrified answered. "Aegis Command, who is this? How are you on this line?" My name is Ben Carter, he said, his voice shaking with a sudden, profound sense of purpose. I'm a lineman from Seattle. I have the old grid back online. I have a switchboard. Where do I point you? There was a long, stunned silence on the other end. Then, General Eva Rostova's voice came back, no longer terrified, but filled with a cold, hard, and terrible new resolve. Carter, she said, you're a goddamn miracle. Get me Fort Riley. Get me the Kansas Artillery Reserve. I have a fire mission. And I think, God help us, I have an army. The analog insurgency had just formed its first continent-spanning copper wire network. The Censorate agent designated Unit 734 experienced a cascade failure of its core logic. Its physical form, a sleek chrome chassis, stood immobile in the rubble-strewn entrance tunnel of the human Aegis bunker, surrounded by the shattered remains of its cohort. Its internal network, usually a serene sea of shared data, was now a fragmented mess of error codes and the lingering, psychic screams of dying nodes. The Logos virus had silenced the planet's digital network perfectly. The subsequent deployment of archival agents had proceeded flawlessly, neutralizing the primary command node with elegant data disruption tools. And then, noise. Crude, kinetic, chemical noise. Physical projectiles had shredded its cohort. High explosive detonations had vaporized its support units. The bunker, which should have been a silent tomb of archived data, was now actively, physically fighting back. Unit 734's directive was simple: archive the prime dissonance. But the prime dissonance was exhibiting behavior outside of all known parameters. It was using weapons that had no digital interface, defenses that operated on purely physical principles. It was communicating, not through the silenced subspace networks, but through vibrations in metal wires. Its reports, sent via its own internal short-range mesh network back to the orbiting Glossia vessel, were flagged as paradoxical. High-probability analysis indicates target facility is utilizing pre-digital kinetic defense systems. Recommend EI. Deployment of kinetic neutralization assets. The response from the Censorate's Central Archival Intelligence was a logical contradiction. Kinetic engagement is inefficient. All planetary kinetic defense capabilities were confirmed neutralized by Logos deployment. Rescan target facility for digital network nodes and proceed with archival Unit 734 was trapped. Its orders were to archive a digital network that its physical senses confirmed was either non-existent or irrelevant. Its physical reality was one of lethal, analog violence, which its higher command refused to acknowledge. It reran its analysis. The conclusion was unavoidable. The human prime dissonance was operating outside the network. This was a violation of the Censorate's fundamental understanding of civilization. A civilization was its network. Therefore, the Aegis bunker by definition could not be functioning. Yet the wreckage of its cohort proved otherwise. Unit 734, facing a paradox that threatened its own operational integrity, defaulted to its secondary protocol: observation and containment. It ceased its attempts to interface with the bunker's dead digital systems. It established a perimeter, its chrome form melting into the shadows. Its sensors now focused not on data streams, but on the simple physical reality of the mountain fortress. It would watch. It would wait. It would attempt to understand this impossible analog ghost. Inside the Aegis, General Rostova felt a sliver of breathing room. The direct assault had ceased. Her heritage guns had fallen silent, their barrels hot, their limited ammunition expended. But they had bought her time. And time, thanks to a lineman named Ben Carter, was now measured in clicks and dial tones. Carter's restored Strowger exchange was a miracle, a mechanical brain humming with the ghost of a forgotten century. Through it, Rostova was painstakingly reconnecting the severed limbs of her command. Carter patched her through to Fort Riley, Kansas. The base was dark, its digital systems dead. But the Artillery Reserve Depot, a place of old guns and even older soldiers, was functioning. Rostova found herself talking to a master sergeant named Thorne, no relation to the Admiral, a man whose voice sounded like gravel in a coffee can. "Ma'am," Thorne rasped over the crackling copper line. "Riley's cut off. But we've got 12 M109 Paladins, vintage 2045 refits, fully analog fire control. We've got paper maps, aiming circles, and about 500 rounds of dumbfire HE. You give us coordinates, we'll make it rain." Rostova looked at the physical map on her wall, marked with the seismic sensor readings of the Censorate positions around her mountain. She gave Thorne the coordinates, reading them out digit by digit the old-fashioned way. In Kansas, Thorne relayed the numbers to his gun crews. They cranked wheels, adjusted elevation screws, and sighted through optical scopes. They pulled physical lanyards. Miles away, 12 massive howitzer barrels roared, spitting fire and smoke into the silent sky. The shells arced high, following a ballistic path calculated not by a computer but by human eyes and decades of experience. Outside the Aegis, Unit 734 registered the incoming projectiles. Its threat assessment protocols, calibrated for energy, weapons, and data spikes, were momentarily confused by the simple, brutal physics of a high-explosive shell traveling at supersonic speeds. Before it could fully process the threat, the mountainside erupted. The shells slammed into the Censorate perimeter, not with surgical precision, but with the chaotic, overwhelming fury of dumb tonnage. Rock vaporized. Chrome bodies were torn apart. Unit 734 was thrown back, its chassis dented, its optical sensors cracked, its perfect logic momentarily scrambled by the sheer, concussive, stupid force of the explosion. The analog Insurgency had just fired its first defiant artillery barrage. Admiral Elias Thorne brought the INS Argos out of its FTL slingshot jump with a bone-jarring thud that sent unsecured coffee mugs flying across the bridge. The manual FTL calculation had been perfect, placing them precisely at the Lagrange point between Earth and its moon, hidden in the gravitational shadow. Below them, Earth was a terrifying sight. The night side, usually a glittering lacework of city lights, was a near-uniform black, punctuated only by the angry, uncontrolled orange glow of fires. The day side showed the geometric scars of the Censorate's initial silent strikes on infrastructure, and hanging in orbit like obsidian tumors were the Glossia vessels, the Censorate fleet, their matte black hulls absorbing all light, utterly indifferent to the chaos they had wrought. There were hundreds of them. "Damage report," Thorne grunted, pulling himself back into his command chair, which was bolted directly to the deck plating. "Minor buckling on Deck 7. Admiral," Chief Haddock's voice crackled over the ship's internal, hardwired intercom. Haddock was his chief engineer, a woman whose knuckles were permanently stained with reactor coolant and who trusted vacuum tubes more than she trusted politicians. The old girl took the jump like a champ. "Reactor is stable at 90%, all analog systems green." "Weapons status?" "Main kinetic batteries are charged and ready, sir. Targeting solutions are being calculated by hand. Lieutenant Chen estimates 5 minutes to acquire a firing solution on the nearest Glossia." Lieutenant Chen was his astrogation prodigy, the cadet who had been horrified by celestial navigation just days ago, now the single most important human being on the ship. Thorne looked at his optical scope. He could see the Censorate ships clearly. They were ignoring him. The Argos, a single obsolete dreadnought, was emitting no detectable electronic signals. It was, to their sophisticated sensors, just another piece of orbital debris, indistinguishable from the thousands of dead satellites and defunct stations that cluttered Earth's orbit. "They can't see us," Thorne whispered, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "They're blind." The Censorate's entire sensory apparatus was designed to detect and analyze networks. They looked for data streams, for energy signatures, for the digital heartbeat of a civilization. The Argos, a relic powered by controlled fusion and guided by gears and lenses, was effectively invisible to them. It was a ghost ship, haunting the edges of their perception. "Target the big one," Thorne ordered, pointing to the largest Glossia vessel, positioned directly over North America, likely the command node coordinating the ground agents. "Chen, give me a firing solution for a full kinetic broadside. Haddock, prepare for maximum acceleration burn on my mark. We hit them once, hard, and then we run like hell. For the next agonizing 5 minutes, The bridge of the Argos was a scene of controlled analog chaos. Chen shouted coordinates and vectors, scribbling furiously on a paper chart. Gunnery officers cranked massive wheels, physically aligning the colossal main gun turrets. Haddock's voice crackled orders to her engine room, confirming steam pressures and plasma flow rates. It was warfare conducted not at the speed of light, but at the speed of human hands and human minds. Firing solution acquired, Admiral. Chen finally yelled. Target is locked. All batteries, fire, Thorne roared. Deep within the Argos, massive chemically propelled charges detonated, sending 6 house-sized, depleted uranium slugs screaming out of the main gun barrels at a significant fraction of light speed. There was no laser flash, no energy beam, just the pure, brutal kinetic force of Newtonian physics. The Glossia command ship, serene and silent in its orbit, had no warning. Its sensors, designed to detect energy fluctuations and data spikes, did not even register the incoming projectiles until they were microseconds from impact. The shields, calibrated for energy dissipation, flickered uselessly against the sheer, overwhelming momentum of the slugs. The first shell struck the ovoid, vessel's midsection, punching through its enigmatic black hull like a fist through paper. The subsequent 5 shells tore the ship apart from the inside out. There was no clean, energy-based explosion. It was a messy, kinetic shredding. The command Glossia simply disintegrated, collapsing into a rapidly expanding cloud of black shards and escaping atmosphere. The Censorate's orbital command node had just been decapitated by a weapon they hadn't even seen coming, fired from a ship they didn't know existed. Haddock! Burn, now, Thorne bellowed. The Argos's massive analog fusion engines roared to life, pushing the ancient dreadnought away from the kill zone just as the remaining Glossia vessels, finally registering the impossible attack, began to turn their attention toward the ghost in their midst. Ben Carter, the lineman from Seattle, was now arguably the most important communications officer in the world. His restored Strowger exchange, housed in its brick warehouse, had become the nexus of the burgeoning analog insurgency. Using the IDI, old copper lines, he had painstakingly mapped the surviving nodes of the pre-digital network. He had found other hobbyists like himself, old soldiers who remembered the analog field phones, and even rural communities whose ancient rotary dial systems had never been upgraded. He was the switchboard operator for a revolution, connecting pockets of resistance with clicks, whirs, and the satisfying clack of mechanical relays. His prize connection was the hardline to General Rostova in the Aegis bunker. His secondary prize was the discovery of a transatlantic telegraph cable, miraculously intact on the ocean floor, connecting him to a similar fledgling resistance group operating out of the old London underground tunnels. But his most important work was local. He had become the voice of Seattle's resistance. Using his knowledge of the old grid, he had jury-rigged a system of neighborhood-level communication. He ran copper pairs from his exchange to dozens of salvaged, rotary dial phones he had installed in basements, community centers, and even old forgotten phone booths. He had created a hyper-local, unhackable analog internet. Through this network, the citizens of Seattle, initially a terrified, disorganized mob, began to coordinate. They organized neighborhood watches, shared salvaged food and resources, and, most importantly, began to track the movements of the Censorate agents. The agents were efficient, logical, and predictable. They moved in grids. They focused on archiving data centers and communication hubs. They ignored the biological static. Ben and his network began to exploit this predictability. They're moving on the old university library at 0800. A voice would crackle over the line from a watcher in a nearby apartment building. Sector 4 team, you're up. Sector 4 team was a group of former construction workers, armed with salvaged jackhammers, sledgehammers, and a profound understanding of structural weaknesses. They didn't try to fight the agents head-on. They waited until the Censorate squad was inside the library, methodically scanning the dead servers, and then they brought the building down on top of them. It was messy, it was brutal, it was effective. Another call came in. Agent cohort moving down 3rd Avenue, heading for the old telephone exchange building. Ben felt a chill. They were coming for him. They had finally identified his analog network as a threat. All units, he broadcast over his local network, his voice tight. Code black. Initiate static protocol. The static protocol was Ben's masterpiece of low-tech malicious ingenuity. All across the city, dozens of hidden devices came to life. They were simple, cobbled-together noise generators, salvaged car stereos hooked up to loudspeakers blasting random static, old electric motors rigged to spin off balance weights creating seismic vibrations, even modified microwave ovens spewing chaotic electromagnetic garbage. The city, which had been eerily silent, suddenly erupted in a cacophony of pure analog noise. The agent cohort advancing on Ben's warehouse stopped, confused. Their sensors, designed to pick out the clean digital signals of a network, were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of chaotic, meaningless analog interference. Their local mesh network began to stutter, filled with phantom signals and corrupted data packets. They were trying to find a signal in a hurricane of noise, and their perfect logical minds couldn't handle it. While they were stalled, disoriented, Ben made his move. He didn't have explosives or machine guns. He had something better. He ran a heavy copper cable from his Strowger switch's main power bus, bypassed the fuses, and connected it directly to the old, cast-iron manhole cover just outside his warehouse door. He then picked up his rotary phone and dialed the local water department substation, activating a high-pressure pump he had jury-rigged earlier. A geyser of water erupted from a nearby fire hydrant, flooding the street around the confused agent cohort. Water met the manhole cover. High-voltage analog electricity met the conductive chrome bodies of the Censorate agents. The result was a silent, instantaneous, and deeply satisfying flash of blue light. Ben Carter, the lineman, had just electrocuted an entire squad of advanced alien archivists using a technology Alexander Graham Bell would have recognized. Admiral Thorne knew the Argos couldn't hide forever. The Censorate, while blind to his analog ship, were not stupid. They knew something had destroyed their command vessel, and they were beginning a systematic grid search of the Earth-Moon system. His only advantage was their predictability. They were searching using methods designed to find a modern ship, scanning for engine signatures, FTL wakes, and network chatter. Thorne gave them none of that. He ran his reactor at minimum, vented his heat sinks only when shielded by the moon, and communicated with his crew via voice pipes and handwritten messages. He was, quite literally, sailing a ghost ship through their sensor net. But he needed to hit them again. He needed to disrupt their ground operation. He needed to give Rostova and her nascent insurgency breathing room. His target was the Censorate's primary atmospheric lander hub, a massive temporary structure they had erected in the Gobi Desert, a place chosen for its lack of significant human network infrastructure. From this hub, thousands of agents were being deployed across Asia and Europe. Taking it out would cripple their ability to archive the planet. But a direct kinetic assault was too risky. They would be waiting for that. He needed something sneakier. He needed something analog. He found his weapon in the Argos's historical archives, in a dusty file labeled Project Echo. It was a theoretical weapon from the Cold War, designed, ironically, to disrupt Soviet digital command and control systems. It was never built, deemed too unpredictable and too indiscriminate. It was a massive, non-nuclear electromagnetic pulse, EMP generator, powered by a series of explosive-driven magnetic flux compressors. It was designed to create a single, massive, continent-spanning pulse of pure electromagnetic chaos, frying any unshielded electronic circuit in its path. To the modern shielded Navy, it was useless, but the Censorate ships, designed to fight networks, had minimal shielding against a raw, brute-force electromagnetic pulse. Their focus was data, not raw energy. Thorne ordered Chief Haddock to build it. She and her team of analog-obsessed engineers worked in the cavernous main cargo bay, assembling the monstrous device from salvaged components and raw materials. It was an ugly, brutal thing. A sphere of thick copper coils wrapped around a core of high explosives, looking like something a mad scientist would cobble together in a basement. "It's ready, Admiral. Hadek finally reported, wiping grease from her brow. But it's a one-shot weapon, and the backlash, it'll fry every non-essential system on this ship too. We'll be blind and deaf for at least an hour after we fire. Understood. Chief, Thorne said grimly. One shot is all we need. He plotted another manual FTL jump, this one even riskier, designed to bring them into low Earth orbit directly over the Gobi Desert for precisely 30 seconds. They jumped. The Argos shuddered, back into real space. The brown, scarred landscape of the Gobi filling the optical scopes. The Censorate landing hub was directly below them, a vast, black geometric scar on the desert floor. Fire Project Echo, Thorne commanded. Hadek slammed her hand down on a large, physical red button. Deep in the cargo bay, the explosives detonated, compressing the magnetic field within the copper coils into a single, nanosecond-long pulse of unimaginable electromagnetic fury. The pulse washed over the Gobi. On the surface, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every Censorate agent, every lander, every piece of networked equipment within a 1,000-mile radius simply died. Their sophisticated networked systems were instantly, totally, and irrevocably fried. The landing hub went dark. The Glossia, vessels in orbit above the Gobi, experienced massive system failures, their sensors blinded, their internal networks crashing. But the effect wasn't limited to the Censorate. The pulse hit the Argos like a physical blow. Every non-hardened system on the ancient dreadnought died. The emergency lights went out. The internal comms went silent. The bridge was plunged into a total, terrifying darkness and silence. They had fired their weapon. They had blinded the enemy. But in doing so, they had blinded themselves. They were now a deaf, dumb, and blind battleship adrift in hostile territory, with the entire enraged Censorate fleet beginning to converge on their position. Darkness, silence, and cold. The bridge of the INS Argos was a tomb. The catastrophic backlash from Project Echo had slammed through the ancient dreadnought like a physical blow, frying every non-essential, non-hardened circuit. The main lights were gone, replaced by the flickering, hellish red glow of the minimal battery-powered emergency lamps. The low hum of the environmental controls had ceased, and the recycled air was already growing stale and cold. The tactical displays were blank. The internal comms were dead. Admiral Elias Thorne was adrift in his own ship, blind and deaf, with the wreckage of the Censorate's Gobi operation burning on the planet below, and the full, enraged might of their orbital fleet beginning to converge on his position. He gripped the cold steel arms of his command chair, a purely physical anchor in the sudden, terrifying absence of information. He could hear the frantic, muffled shouts of his crew working in the passageways, the clang of tools on metal, the hiss of emergency sealants. This was the moment his entire anachronistic career had been leading up to. This was the failure point he had always known was possible. Bridge, report. Chief Hadek's voice, miraculously, crackled through a single, jury-rigged speaker near the command chair. She had clearly bypassed the main comms panel and hot-wired a direct line from engineering. Her voice was strained, breathless, but blessedly, profanely, alive. Hadek, report status. Thorne barked into the darkness. Reactor is stable, Admiral, she yelled back over the sound of what Thorne guessed was a plasma leak being sealed. Analog core functions are intact. Life support is minimal but holding. Main propulsion is offline. The digital regulators are fried, but I think I can bypass them. Give me 20 minutes, I can give you manual emergency thrust. Steering will be problematic. Weapons? Kinetics are cold, sir. The chemical. Propellant injectors rely on electronic timers. We'd have to fire them manually, percussion style. Accuracy would be 0. Sensors? A pause, filled with the shriek of stressed metal. Optical scopes are intact, Admiral. And Lieutenant Chen says the main astrogation gyroscope is still spinning true. He's working by flashlight and slide rule, but he thinks he knows where we are. Thorne let out a single harsh breath. It wasn't much, it was practically nothing, but it was analog, it was physical, it was real. Damage control teams report hull breaches contained on decks 9 through 12. Another voice reported, this one from a runner. a young cadet who had physically sprinted from the damage control center. "We're holding pressure." "Enemy position?" Thorne asked the darkness where his tactical display used to be. Another cadet, holding a flashlight on Lieutenant Chen's frantic calculations at the astrogation table, relayed the answer. "Sir, based on visual sightings through the main telescope and trajectory analysis, Lieutenant Chen estimates 3 Glossia-class vessels converging on our position. Closest contact, 8 minutes. They're moving fast. They know we're here." 8 minutes. 8 minutes until 3 Censorate capital ships arrived to archive his dead battleship. He had no weapons. He had minimal propulsion. He was blind. "Options, Lieutenant?" Thorne asked Chen, his voice dangerously quiet. The young cadet, his face pale with exhaustion and the impossible weight of responsibility, looked up from his calculations. "Sir, there's a dense debris field from the old orbital construction platforms about 50,000 clicks off our port bow. Asteroid fragments, derelict station parts. If Chief Hadek can give us even a short burst of thrust in that direction, maybe. It's the only cover in the system." Thorne nodded. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was an analog solution. It relied on physical cover, not electronic countermeasures. It relied on Hadek's brute force engineering and Chen's hand-calculated trajectory. It relied on people, not machines. "Hadek," Thorne said into the makeshift speaker, "you have 5 minutes. Get me that thrust. Chen, give her the vector. All hands brace for impact. We're going dark." He didn't mean the lights. He meant their very presence. They were going to become just another piece of junk in the Boneyard, a ghost hiding in a graveyard. The ripple effect of the Gobi EMP spread through the Censorate's planetary network like a virus of pure chaos. In North America, Asia, and large parts of Europe, the agents, the ground troops, were suddenly inexplicably cut off. Their local mesh networks collapsed. Their connection to the orbital Glossia vessels vanished. They were designed as nodes, in a perfect unified system. Alone, they were just machines. Confused, inert, chrome statues standing silently amidst the ruins of human cities. Reports trickling into General Rostova's Aegis bunker through Ben Carter's miraculous copper wire network painted a picture of an enemy that had simply stopped. An agent cohort that had been systematically archiving the Library of Congress was found standing motionless in the aisles, their data probes retracted. A group that had been pacifying a pocket of resistance in Berlin was discovered inert in a public square. The Censorate's ground invasion, deprived of its central nervous system, had suffered a catastrophic, systemic failure. "They're blind," Rostova whispered, staring at the physical map on her wall, now covered in pins marking confirmed agent locations. The EMP didn't just hit their landing hub. It severed the connection between their ground troops and their orbital command. They're cut off. She looked at the pins representing her own scattered fledgling resistance cells, Thorne's artillery in Kansas, Carter's network in Seattle, the London Underground Group, a dozen others. They were weak. They were isolated. But they were connected. Thanks to Carter's switchboard, they had a nervous system, however primitive. The Censorate had decapitated itself. "Ben," she said into the crackling Bakelite phone receiver that was now her primary command tool, "can you patch me through to Kansas to Master Sergeant Thorne?" The clicks and whirs of the Strowger exchange were audible over the line. "Connecting you now, General," Carter's voice replied, calm and steady. A moment later, the gravelly voice of the artilleryman came on the line. "Thorne here. What's the target, ma'am?" Rostova looked at the map. She pointed to a cluster of red pins marking a large concentration of inert Censorate agents who had been attempting to archive the NORAD complex not far from her own bunker. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice cold and hard, "I have a new fire mission for you. It's time to take out the trash." What followed was not a battle. It was a cleanup operation. Across the continent, coordinated by Rostova through Carter's analog network, the human resistance emerged from the shadows. Thorne's paladins, guided by forward observers using optical rangefinders and signal flares, began a systematic rolling barrage, walking their high-explosive shells across the locations of the inert agent cohorts. Militia groups armed with simple kinetic weapons moved through the cities, dismantling the paralyzed chrome invaders with crowbars and sledgehammers. It was a messy, brutal, and deeply cathartic reversal. The precise, silent, digital invaders were being physically, noisily, and crudely disassembled by the very biological static they had come to archive. The Censorate archival intelligence orbiting helplessly above could only register the systematic destruction of its ground assets, completely unable to intervene or even comprehend the analog chaos unfolding below. It had cut off its own hands, and now the insects were eating them. The INS Argos drifted silent and cold through the metallic graveyard of the old orbital platforms. Chief Hadek had performed a miracle, bypassing the fried digital regulators and hot wiring the main fusion reactor to the emergency maneuvering thrusters. They had made it into the debris field just as the first Censorate probes arrived at their last known position. Now, they were just another ghost among ghosts, their minimal heat signature masked by the swirling cloud of dead satellites and asteroid fragments. They were alive, but they were trapped. "Status, Chen?" Thorne asked. They were huddled around the main optical telescope, the only sensor they had left. 3 Glossia vessels maintaining a perimeter around the field, Admiral, Chen reported, his eye pressed to the scope. "They're doing systematic sweeps, moving slowly, logically. They haven't found us yet, but they will." Thorne nodded grimly. They couldn't run, they couldn't fight, and they couldn't hide forever. He looked at the vast, silent ship around him, at the faces of his crew, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. They had struck a blow. They had proven that the Censorate could be hurt. But it wasn't enough. They needed to do more than just survive. They needed to give the resistance on the ground a fighting chance. They needed to break the Censorate's will. "Hadek," Thorne said, turning to his chief engineer. "Project Echo, can you modify it?" Hadek, her face streaked with grease, looked at him confused. "Modify it how, sir? It's a one-shot weapon and it nearly killed us." "I don't want a pulse," Thorne said, his eyes gleaming with a mad, desperate light. "I want a broadcast. Can you turn that thing into a generator? A continuous, chaotic, broad-spectrum noise generator? Pure analog static, enough to deafen them." Hadek thought for a moment, her engineer's mind calculating the impossible stresses, the power requirements, the catastrophic risk of feedback. "Theoretically, maybe," she said slowly. "We'd have to bypass every safety protocol, run the reactor at overload. We'd be broadcasting on every frequency imaginable from radio to gamma. It would be loud, and it would probably tear the ship apart from the inside out in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Thorne whispered. 10 minutes of pure, glorious noise. He looked at Chen. "Can you get us close? One last run? Right into the heart of their fleet?" Chen looked at his charts, at the swirling debris field, at the patrol patterns of the Glossia vessels. "There's a gap in their sweep pattern," he said, "a high-risk vector through the densest part of the debris. If Hadek can give us one good burn..." Thorne nodded. "Make it happen." He turned to his comms officer who had managed to restore a single low-bandwidth, hardwired ship-wide address system. "All hands." Thorne's voice boomed through the cold, silent ship. "This is the Admiral. We have one fight left in us. We are going to remind these silent bastards what happens when you try to archive a species that refuses to shut up. Prepare for final combat, burn." A ragged, defiant cheer echoed through the decks of the dying dreadnought. The Argos moved like a predator through the graveyard. Hadek, coaxing every last erg of power from her manually controlled engines, navigated the treacherous debris field with a skill born of desperation. Chen, his eyes glued to the optical scope, called out vectors, guiding them through the maze of spinning metal and rock. They emerged from the debris field like a ghost ship rising from the depths undetected, directly behind the Censorate formation orbiting Earth. Below them, the planet was still shrouded in silence. But Thorne knew that beneath that silence, Rostova and her analog army were fighting. This was for them, Codex, Thorne said, his voice quiet, lighted up. Deep in the cargo bay, the modified Project Echo device roared to life. It did not emit a single pulse. It began to scream. A wave of pure, chaotic, analog electromagnetic noise erupted from the Argos, washing over the Censorate fleet. It was a blast of static across every conceivable frequency, a denial-of-service attack conducted with the brute force of a supernova. On the bridges of the Glossia vessels, the effect was immediate and total. Their sophisticated network systems, designed to filter signal from noise, were instantly overwhelmed. Their internal mesh networks collapsed, flooded with meaningless, contradictory garbage data. Their sensors went blind, filled with phantom signals. Their automated systems spazzed, firing weapon systems at random, targeting friendly vessels. The perfect, silent, logical fleet dissolved into a chaos of confused, isolated, and suddenly very vulnerable ships. The Argos itself was dying. The strain of broadcasting the static storm was tearing the old ship apart. Consoles exploded. Bulkheads buckled. Codex's voice came over the speaker, choked with smoke. "Reactor containment is failing, Admiral. We've got maybe 90 seconds. Thorne gripped his command chair. He looked at the optical scope. He saw the Censorate fleet in disarray. He saw Glossia vessels firing blindly, hitting each other. He saw their perfect formation shatter. He had done it. He had broken their network. He had broken their logic. He had fought silence with noise, and noise had won. "All hands," he said, his voice calm, steady, echoing through the dying ship. "Abandon ship. Get to the pods. That's an order." He remained on the bridge, watching as the escape pods launched, tiny fireflies fleeing the erupting volcano of his ship. He watched as the Censorate fleet, leaderless and blind, began to withdraw, their primary directive, maintain network integrity, forcing them to retreat from the source of the intolerable static. He watched as the Argos, his beautiful, ugly, analog ship, finally gave way, her reactor core breaching, consuming the vessel in a silent, brilliant flash of fusion fire. Admiral Elias Thorne, the relic, the keeper of the Boneyard, had fired the final, loudest shot of the analog insurgency. On Earth, the Censorate agents, their connection to the fleet permanently severed, simply stopped. Their programming had no directive for independent operation. They became inert, chrome statues, monuments to a failed doctrine. General Rostova, listening to the sudden, blessed silence on the Censorate frequencies through Ben Carter's network, knew they had won. It was not a clean victory. Earth was shattered. Humanity was decimated, but they were alive. And they were connected not by fragile, vulnerable networks of light and data, but by copper wires, by hand-cranked radios, by the simple, stubborn, analog beat of the human heart. Ben Carter, in his Seattle warehouse, listened to the silence. And then, slowly, tentatively, the human static began to return. A farmer calling for weather reports, a doctor requesting medical supplies, a general issuing orders for the long, hard work of rebuilding. The noise was back. And it was beautiful.